Deep underneath Gaza lies a labyrinthine network of tunnels that Hamas has spent the better part of 2 decades building. That network, known in some circles as the Gaza Metro, has been used to smuggle weapons and people, as well as provide Hamas with the ability to navigate Gaza secretly. Now they're being turned against Israel. Following Hamas's October 2023 attack on Israel, the two have been at war, with Israel working to secure Gaza and get rid of Hamas. The Gaza Metro has played a key role for both sides. To Hamas, that network of tunnels allows their fighters to move below ground, out of sight of Israeli troops, as well as presents them with opportunities to set up ambushes that Israel could never see coming. To Israel, the tunnels represent one thing: a major threat. Mapping and countering that network is key to Israel's strategy in Gaza. Better yet, cutting Hamas off from the network entirely would force its fighters into the open, where Israel has a better chance of overwhelming them with conventional arms. Enter Israel's newest weapon, the sponge bomb. Despite its strange-sounding name, the sponge bomb is Israel's latest and most novel weapon in its war against Hamas. And in this video, we're going to explore what that weapon is, how it works, and the reason why Israel needs it if it's to have any chance of taking Gaza from Hamas. So we start with the obvious question: what is the sponge bomb? A sponge bomb is a chemical weapon, though not in the conventional sense in terms of how chemicals have traditionally been used in warfare. It's also not technically a bomb, at least when it comes to exploding upon deployment of impact. The idea may sound crazy, but the science behind how it works is fairly simple. A sponge bomb consists of a plastic container into which 2 chemicals are placed. Those chemicals are separated via a metal barrier. Once removed, the 2 chemicals mix together and start to foam. The foam expands rapidly to fill whatever gap it's in, creating a barrier in the process. In practice, the bomb sounds similar to construction foams, which are used to fill gaps in walls and ceilings. With construction foam, the foam is sprayed onto a gap where it expands slightly before it's solidified following the application of water. The foam can also be used as a bonding agent, proving especially useful for adhering insulative panels to one another, and is extremely quick to cure once water is applied. In terms of warfare, an Israeli soldier can toss the bomb at their intended target. Then, poof! Soldiers can deploy the bomb into a Hamas tunnel, where it expands rapidly to create a powerful foam that hardens in minutes. Once it's finished its expansion, the foam solidifies to barricade the gap into which the bomb is deployed, effectively preventing anybody from navigating through that particular tunnel. Beyond that, little is known about the devices. According to the War Zone, or TWZ, the first reports of the sponge bomb, published in the British newspaper The Telegraph, failed to cite any sources that could explain much about it beyond the basics of how it works. We don't know what chemicals are used in the bomb, only that it's small and light enough to be placed on a target or thrown like a grenade. However, TWZ also mentions that although reports of the sponge bomb actually in use on the ground are thin, the concept behind it isn't so fanciful. It cites the previously mentioned urethane-based construction foams, quoting US Composites Inc. when it explains that a 16-pound density foam is essentially as hard as a rock, and would require a hammer to make any sort of dent in the material once it's expanded. If Israel's sponge bomb works in the same way, Israel essentially has a near-instant wall-building tool for blocking the tunnels in Gaza. However, those walls wouldn't be impenetrable. But for the purposes of quickly navigating through the tunnels or sealing them to prevent ambushes during ground-based operations, they could serve to lend valuable time to Israeli troops. TWZ also reports that this isn't the first time that a country has considered using foam in a militaristic capacity. In the 1990s, it states the US Marine Corps was issued a device capable of spraying a sticky foam at an enemy. Designed as a non-lethal tool, the foam would expand around the targeted individual, solidifying around them to effectively immobilize the enemy. It's believed that weapon was deployed during Operation Restore Hope, when the United States approved the sending of its troops into Somalia to help with famine relief in the embattled nation, though reports of actual use aren't clear. The US only spent around 10 months in the country, withdrawing in March 1994 after Somali fighters shot down a pair of Black Hawk helicopters, killing 18 American soldiers in the process. TWZ said it's not known if the US Marines still has its novelty sticky foam weapon in its inventory. And that wouldn't be the first time that the US military experimented with foam. A contract for a similar weapon that the US Marines purportedly used was awarded to a contractor by the US Army. The idea was similar: create a weapon that could quickly deploy a sticky and hardening foam for use in crowd dispersal. But as with the Marines tool, information beyond that is thin on the ground, with TWZ only able to point to a company named Adherent Technologies as being capable of producing a foam that could stop vehicles in their tracks at the time. More concrete evidence is the use of immobilizing foams in the tractor-trailer trucks that the National Nuclear Security Administration uses when carting sensitive cargo, including nuclear weapons, around the United States. In these trucks, the foam is essentially used as a booby trap that sprays whenever an intruder enters the vehicle. Again, the purpose is similar to the other uses of the foam that TWZ reports, immobilizing the intruder with foam to prevent them from getting their hands on something valuable. In theory, Israel's sponge bombs could work in the same way, only instead of hardening around a person, the foam they deploy expands rapidly and hardens quickly enough to seal entire entranceways. However, the technology doesn't come without risks, which is why it's supposedly been heavily tested. According to YO News, Israeli soldiers were first seen deploying sponge bombs in 2021 during training exercises. Those exercises were ramped up in the wake of the October Hamas attack, with YO suggesting that Israel has been using the bombs at its Ze'alim training facility. Ze'alim is home to what the Jerusalem Post calls a simulated maze of a multi-story Arab urban environment. Built in 2005 following the Second Intifada, an uprising of Palestinian citizens against Israel, the mock town cost $45 million to build and features 600 structures designed to emulate the typical conditions the IDF expects to encounter during urban battles in Gaza. Beyond the houses, shacks, stores, and schools, the facility aims to emulate Palestinian life in other ways. Jeeps drive up and down its streets, with minarets installed to blare the muezzin's call that signals when it's time for the town's residents to pray. But perhaps the most important simulation in the mock town is a small tunnel network, in which the IDF not only practices tunnel-based warfare, but has also been testing its sponge bombs. Again, information on the success or failure of those tests is limited. However, YO News reports that the sponge bombs may come with risks that could counteract their effectiveness in the field. One of those risks relates to the materials used in the bombs. Though there's no concrete information about those materials, the chemicals used are believed to be forms of volatile liquid emulsion. That's dangerous in its own right. TWZ, via the Telegraph's initial report, says that some Israeli soldiers have already suffered consequences as a result of mishandling those materials. Thankfully, none appear to have accidentally encased themselves in the solidifying stone. However, the chemicals used are supposedly dangerous enough to have caused several soldiers to lose their sight due to the mishandling. Again, those reports are unverified. However, they've led to speculation that Israel might use novel means to deploy its sponge bombs. These might include specially designed throwbots, which are small robots that deliver visuals of their surroundings to an operator, who would then be able to choose when to deploy the sponge bomb the throwbot carries. Other potential solutions include micro-drones, which the IDF could use to map out the Gaza tunnel systems ahead of time to decide where best to deploy sponge bombs, cutting down on the time they need to carry the bomb. It could even be possible for large drones to deploy the bombs once the micro-drones have mapped the tunnels, eliminating the human element altogether. And beyond the risks the bomb poses to the soldiers deploying them, there's another issue to consider. Many of the tunnels underneath Gaza stretch under civilian buildings, with several having exit and access points inside those buildings. That could present a moral problem for the IDF. Imagine that the IDF has used its sponge bombs to seal a key entrance to these tunnels in an area it intends to strike. That area is heavily populated by civilians, who now have no means of escape. Or perhaps worse yet, the tunnels could be sealed while the civilians are still inside, leaving them to slowly starve if they're not fortunate enough to have the tools capable of breaking through a solidified foam that may be as strong and thick as a solid stone wall. Perhaps it's these risks and moral issues that have led to so few reports of sponge bombs actually being used in the field. Either Israel is being extremely secretive, with only unconfirmed reports of the bomb's existence being reported, or it's decided not to deploy them, either because of the risk they pose to civilians or its own soldiers. Still, those risks might be outweighed by the risks the IDF and even Gaza's citizens face if the tunnels are left intact. To understand why, it's worth exploring a little of the history of Hamas's tunnel network. In July 2014, National Public Radio, or NPR, released an interesting report on the then fighting that had broken out in the Gaza Strip. In that report, NPR spoke to a Palestinian man named Karim, who explained that the fighting had led to a secret entrance to a Hamas tunnel being unveiled. "There is a chicken coop near us," claims Karim, emphasizing that he knew it was a chicken coop because he'd seen chickens being reared there. However, that coop was revealed to be much more than it appeared following an Israeli strike that destroyed it. Underneath lay the entrance to a tunnel that led east toward Israel. "We didn't know about it, but we faced a risk because of it," Karim said. And those words were proven to be true, as the Shujaiya neighborhood in which Karim lived and the chicken coop was located was among the first that Israel shelled when it began a ground invasion into the Gaza Strip in 2014. The result? Thousands of Gazans had to flee their homes to avoid dying due to a secret tunnel that most had no idea even existed. While reports like these represented the first that many outside of military circles had heard about the tunnel network underneath Gaza, NPR says that the Israeli military had known about the tunnels long before the Gaza-Israel conflict of 2014. It reports that even the concept of building tunnels under Gaza has existed for millennia. Referencing Gaza, A History, Jean-Pierre Filiu's book on the region, NPR says that the first historic references to the subsoil of Gaza were made when Alexander the Great laid siege to the region in 332 BC. Those tunnels were the reason Alexander didn't enjoy the quick victory he expected when invading the region. Filiu says that the siege of Gaza involved 100 days of fruitless attacks and tunneling before it finally fell. Alexander was so infuriated by the trouble those tunnels had caused him that he went on a rampage throughout the region. Fast forward to more recent times, and the modern versions of these very ancient defensive measures have been used for more than simply hiding fighters and storing supplies. NPR reports that Palestinians have used the tunnel to overcome Israeli restrictions on traveling, as well as importing and exporting goods. Many of the tunnels have been dug to the south heading into Egypt, essentially making them vital to propping up Gaza's economy. The tunnels are large enough for items like cars and cows to be transported through them, making the tunnels key to a massive smuggling operation that's been going on for decades. Then, Hamas took over Palestine in 2006. The tunnels were still used for smuggling, though the items being sent through them were subjected to attacks used to strengthen the insurgent group. And much like those who fought against Alexander the Great so many centuries before, Hamas quickly realized the tactical potential those tunnels held. They've since used them to set up ambushes, store supplies, and create routes to many of the hundreds of rocket launching positions they've set up inside Gaza. They've also been used to smuggle people. In 2006, Hamas used one of its tunnels to enter Israel and kidnap an Israeli soldier named Gilad Shalit. What followed were 5 years of negotiations, with Shalit being held as a prisoner the entire time, that resulted in Israel capitulating and agreeing to the release of 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for that single soldier. The IDF was left with egg on its face. However, it's also gained a renewed appreciation for the importance of the Gaza Metro to Hamas and how this complex network of tunnels could place them at a disadvantage militaristically. The challenge Israel now faces is that it still doesn't know enough about the tunnels. Where are they? Where do they go? Just how many tunnels exist for them to have to find, clear out, and secure? Reports on all of those questions vary, with the Wilson Center saying it's likely that the full network is at least 300 miles, encompassing much of Gaza. The tunnels are strong, reinforced with concrete, and equipped with electricity that not only lights them up, but enables the use of communications equipment while underground. And according to some Israeli military experts, some of the tunnels descend 200 feet, a serious problem for the IDF when it comes to committing resources to secure them. Hamas has also gone to great lengths to ensure it has secure access to its ancient tunnel network. Beyond the concrete used in the tunnels themselves, Reuters reports that the entrances are typically long vertical shafts that are around 3.2 feet wide and contain climbing bars. Each shaft features supporting walls made using brick or concrete and will stretch as far down as it needs to before it reaches a tunnel that connects to a vast horizontal network that's around half the size of New York's subway. Hamas has also built defensive measures into the tunnels. Many feature reinforced doors that block access to entire sections. It wouldn't be too much of a stretch to suggest that the tunnel network under Gaza is essentially an underground city. A city that could host hundreds, perhaps even thousands of Hamas fighters at any one time. That's the sheer scale of the problem that Israel faces when trying to fight against Hamas in Gaza itself. With its sponge bombs, it hopes to at least be able to make the tunnels less useful to Hamas. It could use the bombs to seal entrances and exits to the tunnels, easily filling the 3-foot-wide shafts that Hamas uses to access its labyrinthine network. It could also use its sponge bombs to seal up fighters inside those tunnels once the IDF has penetrated. Imagine an attack on a portion of the network that sees soldiers descend into connected tunnels from either side, seal them up to block them from being used, and then further seal the entrances to prevent Hamas from getting inside to fix the issue. That's what Israel may have in mind when it comes to its sponge bombs. However, those bombs are far from the only weapons the country has in its arsenal when it comes to dealing with the Gaza Metro. Some of its weapons are diplomatic. Take Egypt as an example. We mentioned earlier that Palestinians often use the tunnels to enter Egypt with illegally smuggled goods, even after Hamas had taken over Gaza. That was allowed to continue for years because of Mohammed Morsi, the former Egyptian leader, and his ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. However, when Abdel Fattah el-Sisi came to power, he eliminated the Muslim Brotherhood's influence, meaning Hamas no longer had an ally in Egypt that was willing to keep the tunnels open. El-Sisi has invested in bulldozing the tunnels into Egypt, weakening a Gazan economy that is already struggling due to Israeli sanctions and Israel's own efforts to demolish the tunnel network. Then there are more conventional military measures the IDF is using to handle the tunnels. Beyond the sponge bombs, which may not have been deployed yet, the IDF will use a host of other techniques to try to map out the tunnels. On the attack side of things, USA Today suggests that snipers will be deployed at known tunnel entrances and exits. Those snipers may be tasked to eliminate any who attempt to use these access points, though that would give away that Israel knows where they are. More likely is that snipers will be deployed to support ground troops on operations near a known access point, allowing them to take out any Hamas fighters who attempt to ambush the ground troops via the tunnels. Who knows, perhaps the snipers could even be used to clear the way for Israeli soldiers to deploy their sponge bombs. Other tactics, according to USA Today, could involve simply throwing improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, down the access points to wreak havoc inside a tunnel. Alternatively, drones equipped with bombs could either drop those bombs down the long shafts used to access the tunnels or navigate down them to explode once inside. Of course, the obvious limitation here is that if Reuters is correct, the access shafts are only 3 feet wide, making it difficult to navigate drones through them. Still, even an explosion caused by a stuck drone in an access shaft could make that shaft useless to Hamas's fighters. There's also the tricky prospect of finding and mapping the tunnels to consider. If Israel is to have any chance of fighting in the tunnels and deploying its sponge bombs, it needs to know where they are. That's tough. Al Jazeera points out that the entrances to the tunnels likely number in the tens of thousands, with most being hidden inside civilian buildings. Satellites can't spot the vast majority of them. However, there are a few techniques the IDF can employ to get an idea of where these entrances are. Drone surveillance is one. Since 2014, Israel has been flying drones around Gaza. Those drones are equipped with clever pieces of software that can analyze recorded footage for movement patterns. If there seems to be a lot of movement toward a particular building that normally wouldn't have so many people visiting it, the IDF can deduce that there's likely a tunnel entrance that's ready for a sponge bombing in that building. These drones can also link to a database the IDF maintains that contains photographs of hundreds of known Hamas fighters. Should a drone find somebody who triggers a match, it can follow that person and perhaps shed light on another tunnel entrance location. It's far from easy work, which perhaps makes it understandable that Israel is considering going all out to get rid of the tunnels altogether. In December 2023, Metro reported on photos of IDF troops who were installing water pumps a mile north of the Al-Shati refugee camp. Fitting 5 pumps in total, the IDF may be planning to use the water those pumps produce to flood the tunnels. According to Metro, the pumps could collectively send thousands of cubic meters of water into Gaza's tunnels every hour. That would offer a fast solution to the tunnel problem. Hamas fighters would have to escape quickly, giving away tunnel entrance locations in the process if they wanted to avoid dying in a watery underground grave. But even that approach has potential problems. Any Israeli hostages being kept in the tunnels would likely die as a result of the flooding, with the constant streams of water also having the potential to damage underground infrastructure in Gaza besides the tunnels. So there's no perfect solution, which brings us back to Israel's sponge bombs. The idea appears to be sound, a fast-expanding foam bomb that essentially creates near-instant walls inside the Hamas tunnels could lend valuable time to IDF forces both on the ground and in the tunnels themselves. But with such a complex network lying underneath Gaza, it's clear the IDF can't rely on sponge bombs alone. It needs to find as many tunnel entrances as it can and map the underground network to figure out where Hamas fighters are likely to spring up. And even if it goes scorched earth with a flooding strategy, it could risk the lives of civilians and Israeli hostages in its effort to gain a tactical advantage. And with that, we turn the questions over to you. What do you think of Israel's sponge bombs? Do they represent a viable tactic for taking on the massive tunnel network underneath Gaza? Or is the idea flawed to the point where the bombs would offer little tactical advantage? Tell us what you think, both about the bombs and Israel's other strategies for taking on the Gaza network, in the comments below. And thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out how Israel's Iron Dome actually works, or click this other video instead.